Hey friends, today we're going to talk about customizing shoes. So, custom shoes are really cool and really popular, and there's lots of different tips and tricks that will help make your custom shoes even better. So, for the purposes of this video, I'm using a pair of white Vans. These are canvas-based shoes, and we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between painting on canvas shoes and painting on leather shoes in a little bit. But for now, we're going to talk about canvas. So the first thing you want to do when you're going to work on a pair of shoes is you want to prime the surface you're working on. So you're basically working on canvas, which is the same material that you would paint on. And so one thing that you want to do is prime your canvas before you start adding paint. So a couple of different ways to prime it. One really easy way is to get clear gesso, which looks like this. Comes in a container, clear gesso. Another thing that you could do if you don't have that is some matte Mod Podge. And finally, a last resort, if you just don't have any other things lying around, is you could do some Elmer's glue in water. And you're going to want to mix that together pretty well. And then you want to paint every surface of the shoe that you plan on painting with that mixture. And then you let that dry overnight before you add any paint to that. And you'll notice that it kind of stiffens up your surface and gives you a little bit easier time when you're going to be painting on it. Now, a couple of other things to keep in mind is certain shoes have certain tags or things that you might not want to get paint on. Usually in shoes like this, you're not going to want to put paint on the rubber because even if you do, it might look nice for a little while, but it's not going to last very long on the rubber. So one thing you might want to do is use some blue painter's tape or some masking tape to mask off the areas that you know you're not going to paint. And this can take a while when you're especially going around the front of the shoe, but it will be worth it. And then another thing you may want to do is also put a little piece of tape around the tag because you want to try not to get paint on those areas. So before you even begin painting, you really want to plan out your shoes, especially if you're planning on wearing them. Obviously, you're not going to want some crazy weird color scheme for clothes that you're going to wear, so you really want to plan out a good color scheme. And so color schemes are a few colors that you think you're going to use across both shoes that are kind of going to be the highlight colors, and then of course you can use other little bits of color for detail. And then one way to get started, especially if you're going to put a design on the shoe, is you want to, on a scrap paper, draw out the shape of the different areas of the shoe that you're going to be putting paint on. So for example, on this shoe, you're going to have these side areas here. So maybe the shape for those that I could draw on my paper, let's see, could be something like this. And I want to make sure that I'm really drawing how big I think it is too. So I want to make it exactly the same size on my paper physically that it is in real life, so I know how much space I have for details. Okay, it's kind of something like that. All right, so then that would be a good shape for me to plan this area on. Then I also don't want to forget the back of the shoe, right? So the back of the shoe is always going to have some sort of different shape of fabric. So in this case, I'm going to look at the shoe from the back. So kind of like up here at the top there. And I'm going to try to draw the shape that I'm seeing just so I have, again, a nice area. It's kind of like that. A nice area to plan a design on. So I know I'm going to have two of these because there's one on each side. One of these back pieces, and then finally for this shoe there's the big front area, so maybe nice and big down here. I give myself this area, and now these are for planning purposes. So if you know you're going to do multiple pairs of the same shoes, you could draw these outlines once and you could photocopy them, and then you'd have lots of different options to play with. And it's always good when you're going to be using color and different things to be able to play around. So I recommend making a copy of it. And then you may also want to label what shoe it is. So these are Vans, and they're just kind of low top regular shoes. So now I've got a spot here where I can draw out the designs that I'm going to use on the actual shoes. And you definitely want to plan out your shoes before you start painting and really know what you're going to do. So let's talk about paint. Now that you have a shoe that's primed and dried overnight, the next thing you're going to want to do after you have a good plan is figure out what kind of paints you're going to use. Now, obviously, you want to use an acrylic type paint, but I'll be honest, I highly, highly recommend for shoes using what are called liquid acrylics. So they look like this. They come in a bottle. There are other brands, not just Golden. And what's great about them is that they're easy to mix colors. Usually you just kind of mix in a container of some sort, or you can always just mix it in a palette or on a paper plate. And what's great about them for shoes is they flow really, really well, and they're also really pigmented. So they make your job a lot easier, especially with canvas shoes. Leather shoes, you can kind of get away with using a more heavy body acrylic. Now, heavy body acrylic is the kind that might come in a tube, so something like this, or even, there are other kinds as well. So the other thing that's really important is that you have a bunch of different sizes of brushes, and you're actually going to probably need some small brushes, even though you know you are painting some large areas. You're going to need small brushes because you're going to want to be very, very careful of not getting your paint in certain areas and on the other parts of the shoe. Now, like we said, you want to tape off areas before you start painting, just to be really, really careful. Unless you really, truly believe that you have a steady hand and you know that you can handle it, in which case you can try it, but it's risky, very, very risky. So I've got here a couple different square brushes. So square brushes are great for edges. And you'll see I'm going to use a square brush in a minute on one of these edges here. So these are the square brushes. And then the round brushes are probably going to be better for details a little bit later on.